Jennet Robinson Alterman has been working hard on women's rights for many years. Today, I talk one-on-one with her about the issues she's fighting for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Jennet Robinson Alterman, welcome back to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you so much for having me, Quintin. It's a real honor.
You're very welcome. And speaking of honor, congratulations on being one of the most influential people in Charleston according to the Charleston Business.
Well, thank you. I have to say that was a bit of a shock, but I'm delighted that work around women's issues is recognized and valued. And there's some pretty heavy hitters on that list, so I was really flattered to be a part of it.
What other women's issues need to be recognized and valued right now in your mind?
Well, there are two things running parallel. One is the effect of the pandemic on women, specifically working women with children, and some of the very hard choices that have had to be made between staying at home with your kids who are not in school versus continuing to work. The fact that so many essential workers who unfortunately are also in low-paying jobs are also being affected by this, in a greater way. Access to the healthcare, which frankly expands to reproductive healthcare. You can't really separate these issues right now. But the other is, I think that pay equity and all the pieces around pay equity really needs to be a priority. I know that it's being discussed at the state level in terms of, I believe it's Representative Raleigh has introduced a bill that would provide pay equity and also do one thing that can make a huge difference, which is do not ask for the salary history on the job application. And also on the job posting, include the salary range. That way you have more of a meritorious basis for making a decision about an employee instead of just basing it on their previous salary. And I think that's really important.
Now, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and ironically enough, I also chair the City of Charleston Commission on Women, and this is something that we're working with City HR on delving into the pieces that make up pay equity. We did make a recommendation last year that the salary question be removed, and we feel that that will happen. We also made a recommendation last year that council approved to implement a 12-week paid leave policy. Now, obviously, because of the pandemic and the budget shortfall, the introduction of that leave system has been postponed for a year, but it is still on the books, and that is what is important.
And you talk about, obviously, the pieces of pay equity. What more pieces need to be together when it comes to pay equity statewide?
Well, things like flexible schedules, access to affordable childcare, leave when you have to take care of a child or possibly an elder parent. I mean, we all know that most of those duties fall to women. And if they're on an hourly job and they have to take time off to do these things that are critical to their family, it's not fair that they should lose their wage to do that. There should be some opportunity to allow people to balance their lives without having to go into debt to do it.
Right. Absolutely. And, you talk obviously about reproductive health care. What long-term goals do you want for that?
Well, I would just like to see Roe v. Wade kept in place. Right now, there's a bill this morning being debated in the Senate Medical Affairs Committee. Right. It is a bill that would ban all abortions at 6 weeks. And there are no exceptions in that bill for rape or incest. The only exception would be for the health and life of the mother. And we feel that that is grossly unfair, that there is no such thing as a fetal heartbeat at 6 weeks. We've had numerous doctors attest to that. And I think it's yet again another attempt by a very conservative element to keep women in their place, that they feel that government should have a role in how a woman makes a choice about her body, whereas they don't want government anywhere else.
Yes, ma'am. And you talk about, obviously, the controversial issue about not including rape and incest. What fair policies do you want to see at the state level with that?
Well, I'd like to see what the current legal abortion standing is. You don't have to end it at 6 weeks. I believe the current one is 3 months. And I think that the other thing is that there are two things that have to happen, Quintin. Number one, we have to have a comprehensive health education and contraceptive access program in this state to give particularly young women the opportunity to protect themselves if they so choose, and to be knowledgeable about how their own systems work. Comprehensive sex education is huge. And as you probably know, most school districts have an abstinence-only health education curriculum. You can't have both. You can't say no contraception and no abortion. I mean, that's counterproductive. So I would like to see, again, more access to health education, sex education, and access to contraception.
Now, with that education program, what type of courses do you like to see ideally?
Well, evidence-based. Let's use curriculum that have shown to be effective, that are fair to the students, that tell them the truth, and at the same time allow them to see the pros and cons of different behaviors.
And what are those pros and cons that most of those students don't know about, Jennet?
Well, having sex without any kind of contraception would be definitely a con to your basic sex ed. Whereas if you do protect yourself and you make that decision to have sexual relations, then you've done the responsible thing.
Yes, ma'am. And let me reset, because obviously, we know you as a household name here in Charleston, and obviously you're a women's rights advocate and have been around the world, as I mentioned off camera, from Afghanistan to Switzerland to obviously your hometown here in Charleston. What headline would you write about yourself today?
Oh my.
As a former journalist.
Yeah, that's you've swung me a wild one there. Not giving up. Not giving up. This Charlestonian is proud of the experiences she's had the opportunity to have around the world, and there's nothing better than working in my hometown, in my home state, on issues to help women and their families. Ain't giving up.
That's right. And a matter of fact, next door, I'm sitting literally next door, right here to the Robinson Theater here at the College of Charleston.
Oh, yeah, named for my father.
That's right. Yes, ma'am. That's right. Right next door.
But Quintin, that's one of the beautiful things about Charleston. There's only maybe 2 degrees of separation.
Right.
And behind me, I have the wonderful Afghan woman who was on the cover of National Geographic back in the mid 80s. And I, of course, spent time as a Peace Corps volunteer in Afghanistan. And that's what turned me into a rabid women's rights advocate. And to come back to South Carolina after being away for many years and seeing so many of those issues that had to be addressed in third world countries and that haven't been here. Things like the high infant mortality rate, the high maternal mortality rate, that's not acceptable in a state like South Carolina.
You talk about the Peace Corps, Jennet. What is the state of that right now, as you know it?
Well, I tell you, it was last year, right about March, they had to pull all the Peace Corps volunteers that were spread all over the world, and bring them back to the U.S. And a friend of mine was the director in Mexico, and I spoke with her just after that, and she said it was really heartbreaking because these volunteers had to up and move, go back home, leave their villages, leave the families, the host families that they had, and there was a great hope that they might be able to go back. But again, Peace Corps' big promise to volunteers is their health and safety.
Right. Absolutely.
So until it's safe to go back, until the healthcare is in place, until everybody is vaccinated, I don't think we're going to see a big push. But Peace Corps is not going away.
That's great to hear. And let me go to those third world countries that obviously you talked about recently. What are those issues that are not on the front page of the average newspaper?
Hunger, literally hunger. Our former governor, David Beasley, just got the Nobel Prize for the World Food Program. And one of the things he said when he accepted it was not for him, it was for the thousands of people who work with him to distribute food. And food insecurity, as we've known during the pandemic, is now rife in this country. And I'll tell you, people in the rest of the world are shocked that Americans are going hungry, because their view of us is we are the land of plenty. Some of the other issues that I found that were pervasive through the third world were girls' education, girls being allowed to get an education, girls being allowed to go to school. One of the bright lights I found in almost every country I had the pleasure of working in were the number of women entrepreneurs, okay, that would have tiny micro businesses that would make a difference in their families' lives. Because when they had money, when they had extra money, they put it into food, they put it into health, and they put it into education. And if they had anything left over, they kept moving to a bigger business. And it really worked. When I was at the Center for Women, we did have a microloan program, and it was wonderful to see how a relatively modest sum of money, around $1,000, could allow a business to thrive, to just give it that one step up to be able to move on and become sustainable.
I might be asking the question the wrong way, but where is, for lack of a better word, the infrastructure for, the women minority businesses here in Charleston?
Well, there are a couple, and I'm very happy to say there's an important new one, an organization called Increasing Hope. And I recommend that you talk to Dorothea Bernique.
Oh, yeah.
She is an amazing individual. She's been doing financial counseling for those who have little money to deal with for the last 15 or 20 years. And now she's opening up a center in North Charleston where she will be housed with the heirs property and the block grant that Bernie Mazik runs.
Right.
And she has just been designated a huge grant from the Small Business Administration to train women entrepreneurs. And that is huge. On the other side of town, you've got the YWCA, who's also starting a program for women entrepreneurs of color.
Right.
And I can see a real intersectionality there if you get these programs, the smaller ones, the bigger ones, to talk to each other. Because I will tell you, and when you look at funders, they like to see collaboration. They don't like to see silos of work being done in a community. And I'm very, very pleased for Increasing Hope. They will do a fabulous job with this, as will the Y.
Absolutely. And when those people come together and talk, what exactly should they talk about right now?
Well, they need to talk about supporting each other. They need to talk about how they're going to navigate the new reality of having a business during and after a pandemic. They need to be talking about how they can redesign possibly the childcare system. I remember years ago, I think it was Verizon was bringing a big call center here to North Charleston. And I was on the board of the chamber at the time, and the new manager was also on it. And I asked him if he was going to put a daycare center as part of the new building. And he looked at me like I was some crazy woman. And I said, well, think about it. Probably 90% of your employees are going to be women, and many of them are going to have children. And you're building this in an area that is a bit of a commute for most families. So think about the benefits of having a childcare center, which you don't have to run. Just give somebody the space and contract with them to run it, and what a difference that would make in your employees' lives. Unfortunately, he wasn't ready to hear that. So those are the kinds of things that I think all of us need to be pushing, particularly now that we've seen what happens when we have to work from home and when our kids have to be at home. How do we manage that?
Yes, ma'am. And, something just hit me just a few minutes ago. Obviously, we are in a pandemic, as you just mentioned. How many women's businesses have been obviously developed here in the city of Charleston, in your mind?
How many have been developed?
Yes, ma'am.
I honestly couldn't answer that question. The City Minority and Business Enterprise Office may be able to tell you that. I do know there are a lot of what I call micro businesses, where somebody is providing a modest service. And it's not necessarily something that's going to have a billboard and a bricks and mortar retail operation. I mean, you can just look at a website like Etsy. Okay, all those people on Etsy, they're not in offices. They're not out there, driving up customers. They're making things that people need, and they're selling them at very modest prices. So I don't think we will ever get a full count of how many women business owners there are in Charleston County. But I can tell you, the last time I looked at the stats, South Carolina was one of the fastest growing states for women entrepreneurs. And a lot of that is because of the low wages, the few benefits, the fact that there's not flex scheduling for women. And when you have a business of your own, you're able to really create a schedule that fits your family needs.
Absolutely. And, obviously we had to talk all summer long and even right up here recently about PPP. It hasn't been fair to a lot of women owners in your mind?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Yes, ma'am. When you think of PPPs recently,
Right.
has it been fair to the average woman business owner?
I honestly can't tell you that. I think that you'd have to look at the bank. They have to apply through a bank
Right.
to get the PPE loans. So the payroll loans is what you're talking about. And the bank has to have had a relationship, I think, with the SBA and businesses. And so many, again, these small businesses don't necessarily even have a bank account. And so they don't have the financial administrative structure to be able to apply directly. And these are the smaller mom and pops. And I think that a lot of big businesses got that money because they had the infrastructure in place to request it. I think we could do a better job of seeking out maybe community banks, some of the other financial institutions who could work directly with these smaller businesses to help them get the kind of relief that they need.
Yes, ma'am. And what are the needs that you're hearing right now when you go around this community?
What are the what?
The needs that you hear when you walk. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I live out at Wadmalaw Island right
yes.
now, so I can start rattling off everything from roads and infrastructure availability to public transportation, food deserts. I mean, I could go on and on. Daycare centers, you don't see them. The no sidewalks. I mean, think about what a difference a sidewalk makes when a child is walking home from school. So food insecurity. And downtown, I think there are a lot of those same issues there. But also the high cost of living downtown, the fact that there's very little affordable housing. That to me is one of the biggest needs for the city and for the county, is we've got to have more affordable and low income housing. People deserve to be able to afford to own a house. And I think we need to do a much better job of that in the future.
Let me ask you this, Jennet. If you could talk to a developer right now, what incentives that you would want them to bring to these particular areas that need affordable housing?
Well, I think the obvious one would be tax incentives. And there are tax credits that can be given to developers. And they say, okay, I'll designate 25% of the apartments I'm building to be affordable housing. But after a certain period of time, they don't have to do that. And their definition, many people's definition of affordable housing isn't really that affordable. If you look at low income housing, you look at the housing projects throughout Charleston and the county. I mean, there are people in those subsidized housing that can't pay more than a couple $100s a month. And those people aren't going to be able to move into an apartment that's $1,800 a month because that's somebody's definition of affordable housing. So I think we have to get down to brass tacks on this and truly create affordable housing for low income households and put it that way. I don't know a single person, particularly a single mother, living in any of our public housing that doesn't want to get out of there and get their own place.
And this might be a redundant question, but what is your definition of affordable housing?
Well, my definition of affordable in the olden days, back when I first started my first job, I remember my father telling me no more than 25% of your salary should go to housing, for an apartment or whatever. Right. And now it's over 30%. And there's something wrong there. So I guess my definition of affordable housing would be to try to get back to that maybe lesser percentage of total income. To help even the playing field a little bit. And I know that, a lot of affordable housing is geared toward policemen and firemen and teachers, folks that aren't making a whole lot of money. And they need to be given mortgages at extremely low interest rates, if at all possible. and give them longer terms to be able to pay it off. I see these habitat houses going up all over Johns Island, and they're wonderful, and they become affordable after they're built. And the person who gets that house helps build it. They put sweat equity into it. And I wish we could see more of that. But of course, in downtown Charleston, there's no place to put little houses everywhere.
That is exactly right. And let me get back to you. You said to the Elevate Network, a global professional community network for women, that patience and listening skills encouraged in order to be successful in your line of work. What skills have actually made you successful for so long?
Well, I'm not risk averse. I tend to speak my mind, but I also know when to stop talking and listen. And as I've gotten older, I've gotten a whole lot better at that. And I think that the greatest eye-opener for me all those years I was working in third world countries was to try to be in someone else's shoes at some point, to try and understand the underlying issues that a person in Senegal or a person in the Philippines or a person in South Africa have to deal with. And we have to do it here more. And I think a lot of what has fueled the divisions in this country and in this state and in this community is we haven't taken the time to sit down and listen to each other. You and I grew up in very different Charlestons, and I think it's up to people like us to bring those different Charlestons together.
And let me reread that again. It says, you said this to the Elevated Network, to have the patience and listening skills and courage in order to be successful in your line of work. What do you have the patience for these days?
Patience comes easier when you're older, because I know that if I'm doing the long run here, okay? I see what's at the end of that road, and I'm going to work toward it. And I'm not going to get frustrated if people pass me on the way. I'm going to be like the tortoise and the hare. I'm going to go slow and steady and slow and steady. And if we have to do things by increments, in other words, something like pay equity, we work to get the salary history question off. We work to get paid family leave. That's not all one big package, but we're chipping away bit by bit at the pieces that will ultimately help the next generation have more family-friendly work environments.
And I know in talking about your career accomplishments, you mentioned that to Elevate about the Center of Women, obviously. You said this quote, "Our organization brought women's economic issues to the community table and raised awareness around the state and the region." Now that the Center of Women is no longer in existence here in Charleston, what women's economic issues besides pay equity that you want to bring to the table and raise awareness about?
Oh, there are a lot. There are a whole lot. And I would suggest as a resource, another organization that I've been very, very involved with, which is the Women's Rights and Empowerment Network, right. SC-REN, like the Carolina Wren.
Right.
And I was the founding chair of REN. And the first thing on our plate was to look at how we can economically empower women and girls and their families in South Carolina. And I'll give you a wonderful example. We were able to get the Pregnancy Accommodations Act passed through the South Carolina legislature. Now, what I'm about to say is going to sound like common sense, but it had to be legislated. It said that if you were pregnant, your employer should make reasonable accommodation so that if you have to stand in your job, you would have the use of a stool, that you could have a water bottle at your workstation, that you could have an extra bathroom break in the morning and the afternoon, and that you not be asked to lift more than 20 pounds without a doctor's note. Right now, or before this act was passed, if you were pregnant and your employer was asking you to lift more than 20 pounds on a regular basis, you would have to get a doctor's note to not have to do that. Now, that's an important piece. Again, it sounds like common sense, but it affects the ability of a pregnant employee to continue to work as long as she can. And then with a Paid Family Leave Act, right, she would have time to recover and recuperate and then go back to work. So it's, you can see it on both sides, the economics of that. Frequently, women go back to work 2 and even 3 weeks after giving birth. And, that's not a good time. Let's just face it. There's a tiny baby at home, and this woman is going back to the workplace. And the only reason she does that is because she doesn't have paid leave. And it should be the same for a man like you who wants to care for an elderly relative or a sick child. We have to build into our work life the benefits that help our employees and in return help our businesses.
And what other benefits would be ideal right now?
Wow, you really caught me short on this one. Equal pay for equal work is definitely one of them. Electing more women. Okay, this is something I feel very, very strongly about. There is now a program called Emerge South Carolina, which is actually training women in how to run for office.
Right.
And so I'm going to go to the front of the line on this one and say, until we get more women in positions of power, in positions of legislative control, we're not going to see a whole lot of benefits coming out for women. We have to have better representation at the table. I'll give you an example. Frequently there'll be a committee that will be debating an economic issue that particularly addresses women, and all the people debating it are men. There always needs to be proper representation at the table.
I have to ask a simplistic question, but
Sure.
why is this still the case in 2021?
I wish I could tell you that, but I think it's cultural, and I think particularly in the South, you're raised with at least as a woman, don't brag about yourself and don't talk about money, it's tacky. And those are the two things you have to be able to do to get ahead, whether it's in politics or business or any other kind of profession. It's slow. It's going to be slow. And I think that because of the polarization, particularly right now, it's making it even more difficult. People have dug in on both sides, and we have to somehow figure out a way to bring people together in the middle to come up with compromises that will work for both sides. And I see the young, what I call the young, the millennials, those who are really having to deal with the horrific impact of this pandemic. I mean, if you just graduated from college before this thing started, you're probably still looking for a job. And this is your future we're talking about. So more people have to get involved and have to advocate and not count on other people to lobby on their behalf, basically.
And I know that you said this, my mission from an early age has been to work for women and to promote equity, equality, pay equity, access to reproductive health care, reduce domestic violence, and all other myriad of issues that are interrelated. What is the biggest difference about these issues from when you're younger to right now?
Unfortunately, not a lot. With domestic violence, we're still in the top 10.
Right.
Infant maternal mortality has not gone down. A lot of our rural counties don't even have a clinic. I think there are 8 South Carolina counties that don't even have an OBGYN. There has not been a consistent passion and commitment over a sustained period of time to address all these issues as they intersect. And I don't want to sound like a reverse chauvinist, but I think women are a bit better at doing that, figuring out the intersectionality of a lot of these issues and seeing how joining forces with different groups, whether it's People Against Rape, my mother's house, the YWCA, D. Norton Children's Center, we all need to be talking to each other. And the other piece of this is the relationship with the police. And I know that they've recently done a racial bias audit at the police department. They are working really hard to address those issues. And one of the biggest issues is how to have the police understand the communities that they police, literally walk in their shoes, so that when a policeman approaches someone in a low-income area of town, the first reaction is not, I got to get out of here. But instead, maybe this policeman's coming to ask me something important. And I hope we can get to that.
Where should the intersectionality be when it comes to domestic violence?
That's going to be between, very frankly, the law enforcement, the shelter people, and the mental health folk. Okay, because if you, for example, had a mental health professional or counselor go on domestic violence calls with a police officer, it might make it easier to suss out the situation to hopefully, bring it down a notch. Now, I know that sounds like pie in the sky, but at the same time, look at some of the horrific things that have happened. Look at Breonna Taylor. I mean, she wasn't doing anything wrong. She got out of bed, and because her boyfriend was defending her in her own apartment against police who had broken in for the wrong reason, she ended up getting killed. Now, I can't say this might have made a difference, but if part of the police procedure was to talk before breaking down a door, and I know, again, that's naive, but there has to be a way for the police and the so-called victims to be able to have some kind of dialogue before it accelerates out of control.
And let me ask you this: do you believe that the obviously the racial bias company that was hired by the city? Do you believe that they were objective, in any way by chance?
I've only seen the summary of it, so I really can't speak to their capabilities on that. I know that they had a strong track record of doing these kinds of audits in other places.
And, obviously you're in the community a lot. What exactly does the community need right now from law enforcement?
Oh, for law enforcement. I mean, I think of being a 22-year-old young woman who's gone through the police academy that is now out patrolling the streets. And I can't imagine that person is not terrified a lot of the time. And I think that if our training can include not just how to handcuff somebody or how to protect yourself from being shot, but some aspect that can slow down the simmer, you know what I mean? Be able to have a dialogue, be able to say to someone who's under stress, let's talk about it. I can get you help. There are a lot of ways you can approach this. I'm not an expert. I know that our Charleston Police Department has taken this very, very seriously. Our City Commission on Women has been working with Wendy Stiver, who they brought in to do justice and procedural research. And we're definitely looking at these kinds of issues and how we can help the police department and our communities understand that it needs to be a mutually trusting situation.
And let me ask you this too. You said this quote: "I find my balance by understanding that my plan on any day will, in all probability, go differently, and I have learned the importance of quote not getting my knickers in a knot by living by my
where do you find these things, Quintin? Oh, that's terrible. Actually, that was a quote I made when I was talking about the fact that, you can plan your day, okay? Yes. You can sit there with either your calendar on your phone or your old BlackBerry there you go. And you can put in there everything you're going to get done that day.
Right.
And at the end of the day, when you get home, you need to look at everything on that list, and then you need to look at everything you actually did.
Right.
And my point in that was, don't get your knickers in a knot if things don't go according to plan, that you've got to be able to be nimble. And if one meeting is in the way of another meeting, you make the judgment as to which one you go to instead of sitting and angsting over trying to do both.
Right.
It took me a long time to figure that one out, but that's particularly what I tell young women now. You can overschedule yourself so fast. Leave time in your schedule to breathe.
Oh yes, I agree with that one. Absolutely. Let me ask you this too. What plan do you have to balance these issues in the future as a women's rights advocate?
Oh, I'm going to be the ultimate cheerleader. I'm going to do everything I can to bring together all the different parties that need to be addressing this. I'm a big networker. And as you know, Charleston is wrapped in the arms of a large city, but it's still a small town. And I want to take advantage of that. I want to take advantage of long-term relationships that we all have that can bring our circles together. And that's really how I intend to spend my twilight years.
Jennet Robinson Alterman, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you, Quintin. It's always a pleasure. You take care and Happy New Year.
Likewise, and tell Jack I said hello.
Oh, I will. And you need to interview him again. He's got a new book out.
Okay, I definitely will get to that as soon as possible.
Wonderful. Thank you, Quintin.
Thank you.